mute when you're speaking, but that's life. Great. Okay, we're recording. So welcome to the CircusTalk series of panel discussions in response to the COVID-19 virus and its effect on the circus world. I'm your moderator, Kim Campbell, the editor of CircusTalk News. And we've gathered together some school directors today from different regions of the world to discuss how circus schools are responding to the repercussions of the COVID-19 virus in their sector. We've all experienced cancellations of performances and festivals, and most, if not all, of the circus schools around the world are currently closed or considering it, and at the behest of their local governments. So soon they're going to have to make tougher decisions on graduation and spring shows and when next year starts, what the impact will be. And we'd like to discuss those today. We're going to ask a lot of important questions. Not everybody's going to have the answers. It's okay. Nobody has the answers right now to everything, but it's important to get this conversation going, I think, so that the circus world has some sense of unity as we work through these issues. So I'd like to ask everybody for a snapshot of your region, like the governmental measures that are taken, and also then we can dig into the impacts of your school. But one thing I think a goal should be is to talk about the physical and mental health of the students and the educators, as well as the long-term prospects for the school and any emergency supports, alternative education methods, recommended steps, etc. Let's start with some introductions from our panel though. Shana, can you introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks Kim. So I'm Shana Kennedy. I'm the executive director of Circadium in Philadelphia, and I'm also the founder of the Philadelphia School of Circus Arts. And we are a pretty large school in Philadelphia right now with these two branches, the recreational side and the professional side, which are handling the situation quite differently. So I'm happy to talk about both of those things. Okay. And also just to know, our school is only our third year of operations. So our plan was to graduate our first class this spring.
Okay, thank you, Shana. Tim?
Yeah, I'm Tim Roberts, and I'm the chief executive of the Quebec City Circus School in Quebec City. Our situation, I guess our business models is the same as Shana's. We have a recreational department and we have a higher education department, and we're having to deal with information coming from two completely different sectors, and how we marry that in inside the school is something that's quite difficult to manage. And at the same time, we're at the position at the end of the year where all those questions are happening as well. What happens with the end of the year and how we manage the students and the teachers.
I see. Thank you. And Donald?
Hi, I'm Donald Lehn. I'm the director of the Carampa Circus School in Madrid. And like Tim, former president of the FEDEC. Our school manages, but we don't offer a university program. We offer a 2-year full-time professional training program, and then we have children's school, special needs, and other programs, aside from another chapter, which we won't really talk about today, as a performing venue and a promoter of performance in different festivals.
Yeah, and that's a conversation that we'll be having in a future panel is, speaking to artists and events planners and things like that. So before we go into questions today, I just want to ask you each for a quick snapshot about your region of the world, above and beyond circus. What's it like in your city right now? What are the measures that are being taken? Maybe we can start with you, Shana.
Sure. The United States right now is very compartmentalized in how they're handling this. It seems different in every state and every city. And that's very hard to keep on top of because you're trying to listen to your own local government, but then you're also sort of paying attention to what's happening in California and Kansas and New York. In Pennsylvania right now, the governor has mandated all businesses and non-essential services closed for the indefinite future. He's given no end date on when things are allowed to reopen. However, the Philadelphia School District has only closed for 2 weeks. It's supposed to open next week from now, so that's left us all in a bit of limbo, not knowing what's going to happen next. The social distancing measures are active. Everyone's fully aware of them, participating in them, but it's not nearly as lockdown as some other parts of the country or some other countries right now.
Gotcha. Thank you. And are you taking your lead from the school system, it seems like, in your response?
Somewhat. We started to take our lead from the school system, but then when the governor came in, that became sort of a higher mandate that we had to obey. Mm-hmm. And we're just not sure going forward which of these two things we listen to.
Gotcha. Okay, Tim, how about you?
In Quebec City or in the province of Quebec, all the measures of social distancing are in place. We're not in lockdown either. We're allowed to go out and go food shopping if we want. The recommendation is to limit all non-essential movement. So a lot of people are at home. People are walking. It's almost springtime. It's only, like -5 centigrade. So, people are practically in shorts. So we're going outside and walking, but it's funny to see how people manage the distance and stuff. There's lots of businesses closed. And yeah, I'd have to say that the provincial government here is managing things quite well. There's no panic. People are listening to the recommendations and adapting to what's going on, really. But for the moment, there's no massive lamp down. And we're taking what's difficult in the school is try to manage the fact that, like Shana and Donald, we have two completely different series of activities. So on one side, we have to respond to the mandate of the Ministry of Education in regards to the higher education program, which closes down for 2 weeks until next Friday. But I imagine they're going to make an announcement on Monday, which is going to extend that. People are talking till the beginning of May. Then we also have the municipal information, because all activities like pools and libraries and any public services are all closed down.
Yeah.
So that impacts because of the school thing and this activity thing, the bottom's fallen completely out of the recreational department, which means all schools have canceled any school trips we run a whole series of school programs where people come and do circus stuff, and the bottom's fallen out of that until next September. So,
Sure.
Having to lay off people in the recreational department and managing things like that. It's trying to manage two things, two sectors at the same time in one building. It's got its challenges.
I imagine that's really complicated. Yeah. I'm thinking that far ahead for one task and not for the other. Donald, how about you?
Well, Spain is a few weeks ahead of the North American landscape as far as the dispersion of the virus goes. Spain is on full-fledged state of siege shutdown. To walk on the streets now, you need a sworn certificate. So people are literally obliged to be in their homes. They are fining people who leave their homes. You can go to the supermarket, you can go to the pharmacy, and you can attend an old person, and that's it. The first order for us came from the state government, which was not to us exactly, it was to close down the public school system. We responded to that, arguing that the conditions, that the risks that made that a good idea were just as applicable in our school as in the public schools, even if we were not certifying. On the other hand, the university has maintained their teachers in salary, and the teachers are supposedly generating contents for the students. E-learning, which is just fine if you're doing economics. It's not really practical if you're doing Circus. I think we should talk a little bit more about that later. But here, really, the situation is very serious. There are no cars on the highways. There are no people in the streets. They are seeing wild boars, and I live outside of Madrid. Wild boars in the middle of the towns are just, they're daring to come down, out of the woods. It's a pleasure not to have planes flying over every 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But Spain is pretty much shut down at this point.
Yeah, I realize it's definitely impacting already. It's a couple weeks ahead of us. And I bet you the morale is suffering. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But Shana, I wanted to ask you a question about the outbreak. When it first started, when you started hearing that the school was going to close, how did you figure out your priority list, the order of operations, and how difficult was it to make that call?
Sure. It's extremely difficult because at least in the United States, we have not gotten a lot of clear directives from anyone. The Board of Education has not given us much information. Everything's been left for us to kind of wing it. And so we've been trying to follow the lead of other organizations around us. On the educational side, it wasn't that difficult because we have lots of places we can compare ourselves to. There's lots of gyms and yoga studios and various things that we can compare ourselves to and say, okay, what are they doing? What should we do? But they still didn't really feel the need to shut down until March 14th, I think was the day they finally decided to close operations over there. On the college side at Circadium, it's been significantly harder because we have such a small community that we actually can be very flexible and make decisions day by day. I'm talking about really less than 35 people in total with all of our faculty and staff who are affected. So we can play it by ear a little bit. There's also no real comparable organizations for us to look at. The colleges and universities in the US are all absolutely shut down. They've sent all their students home and they're all operating online classes. It doesn't work the same for a circus school, and we are a vocational school, not a university. We just are really struggling to figure out what box we fit into. And there was a few days there where I was really trying to consider a way that we could just have individual training happening in the school. You know, this idea of you have like 2 or 3 students in the building at a time. Can we have just private lessons going on? We explored that for a while before the governor's mandate finally came down. But yeah, this felt very much like a day-by-day struggle. Yeah. Still in it. You know, we still have not figured out what's happening after this week. And it's kind of every day we're watching the news and trying to make decisions for our small community. The other thing that we are doing, again, based on our size, this is working, is maintaining a lot of online meetings, workouts, conversations among the students and teachers. And that's sort of helping keep our school feel a bit intact. Everyone's meeting for warm-ups every morning and someone doing the warm-up online. And so that's been a good thing. I'm just not sure how long we can continue with the same structure.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a challenge, and also at the same time kind of comforting to the students and staff to have this connection maintained during that phase where everything's kind of uncertain, and I'm sure they appreciate it. Tim, so this is kind of looking a little bit into the future for your professional students. What do you think this huge break in training and will have on the skills and the endurance of circus students in general?
It's obviously going to have an impact. I mean, like Donald said, and like Shana says, we can do theoretical. Our mandate is quite clear from our validating institution. We're closed for 2 weeks. No one's allowed to give online classes. Just because there's a question of equality of access that has to be dealt with. Not all students have the same access, but it's quite clear. We had to close the building. No one's allowed in it. I manage 3 people in the building at a time, and I have a cleaning staff that at night disinfects, wherever we've been. But it's quite easy. We had to close the doors and not do anything. The students are at home. The repercussions of that are quite tough because most of the consulates were telling all their expats to come home. So, I've talked with the school in Montreal. We're having to deal with students in 3rd year that have gone home. Maybe they'll never come back. Of course, it's not just our students, it's the entire sector that is going to have an impact because there's no training spaces open. There's no schools open. You've all seen the news, the repercussions on our sector. What it's highlighted is actually how not even precarious is the word, because, Cirque du Soleil's laid off 4,000 people.
Yeah.
Okay. And if we're going to talk honestly, having to close the school, we didn't have a choice because the government told us we had to do it. Managing the disappointment and the frustrations of students was massive, and managing the clients of our recreation, because no one believed it.
Yeah.
So you had to deal with all that disappointment. How can you salvage something? But at the same time, you want to tell the students, we're going into a world that is not the same as before. And we know every circus company's had to bring their artists back because tours have been canceled all over the world. Shows have been shut down. There's probably 5,000 circus artists in the province of Quebec alone. Not 5,000, no. 5,000 people that I know of that no longer have jobs. So the students, yes, it's going to impact their physical training and their education, but at the same time, what world are they going to go into? How long is it going to take for the companies to start up? How long, the kind of thing. We need to think about that because, as much as I have to manage all this stuff and keep them fit, they're going to have to learn to keep themselves fit because who knows if there's a sector for them to go into after this. And I know students are going to listen to that. And if we're talking right, eventually the sector will come back. But we've been hit really hard in this sector. And it's not just circus people, it's musicians and actors and anybody that does anything in the entertainment business.
Yes. Yeah. And it depends, I think certain regions will have different. I wish somebody from France had come on, but Donald, because I know Spain doesn't support the arts in a similar way, but I wonder if the sector in France, for example, will bounce back sooner because they'll have more financial support from the government for arts, or the UK is currently instituting some measures to kind of keep artists funded during this.
If I can interject, the government here, for example, where one thing we're quite relieved is that any grant that, like, for example, the grant keeps coming in every month from the Ministry of Education for the program. So I can maintain the contracts of the teachers until the end of our academic year, for example. But if they decide to restart up again in May, do we catch up those classes and we end up having to pay? If we pay people during the period we don't work, we won't have the funds to pay people for over the period if we have to catch up the weeks we've missed.
Right.
And because we lost the recreational income, I don't know. That's why those discussions with the city are going to be important. Our grant from the city comes in, but that covers overhead and stuff like that, not salaries. And nationally, we have this kind of small circus festival that starts in June for a weekend, and the federal government that finances culture has said whatever grant you received for your event, you do not have to hold your event. You can still use the money for whatever you need to use it for, but you don't. So, there's a bit of a cushion, but it's after that we don't know.
Sure. Donald, right now, like you said, it's a little bit further along in Spain. Have you been in contact with your students regularly? Is there any measures going on between the staff and students to kind of keep morale up? And what's the status of everyone?
Can I comment a couple of things that Shane and Tim had said first?
Certainly,
and
yes.
Then I'll tell you that. Yeah. So first, when this first hit us, what was our first concern, right? And our first concern was for people as educators, not as circus educators, as educators, for people to accept the circumstances. This is what's going on right now. So when you close the schools, you had these students all pulling on my sleeve saying, well, if the school is closed, can we come and train? No. Then we had teachers saying, since there are no students there, can we come and train? No. Then we had the company saying, well, since there's no students and no teachers, can we come and rehearse because we open in May? No. Technical people from the tent saying, well, why don't we bring in this guy from Barcelona and this other guy from here to do our inspection, which we usually do in July, and do a technical revision of the tent. You're not going to put people on a plane and bring them here. That's not responsible. So just getting people to accept this is what's going on right now was really complicated. And there's a thing that I call like the nest feeling that people have for our schools. So one of the young women said, well, and then I have to, so what am I going to do? Go home to Barcelona. I feel safer here than I do in Barcelona. And safer in the sense that here in the school, they know that the accompagnement, that we are counseling them in their artistic needs, in their physical health needs, in their emotional needs, in their social needs. And that's a part of, by people who are concerned and caring. And that happens in this space. And it was really hard for them to get their head around the idea that they're going to have to leave that nest and deal with all of that on their own, or at least without the comfort of being in that environment every day, all day. Right? What was your question, Kim? Let me get back to that.
I think you kind of answered it. You talked about, like how everybody didn't want to accept it. Now they've obviously accepted this. Are you still communicating with them?
Yes, if we were in contact. Okay. So just another thing about, and I want to comment about Tim. Most of the political action here is transversal. So we do have a platform which unites most of the organizations that include the Actors Union, that includes dance companies and dance professionals, that includes the circus, two different circus organizations. And so when we go to the ministry, we're going as a sector, as the performing arts sector. And that means that they're listening much more carefully, because it turns out it's the fourth biggest sector in productive sector in Spain.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, when they started getting the numbers and really realizing how many people were involved, they said, well, look, if we're looking at the automobile and we're looking at the tourist industry, this is next on the list. So at least they're aware of that. The teachers, when I lay off a teacher, they get 70% of their salary.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who are autonomous, they're self-employed, are getting, if they're legally self-employed, that means if they do their paperwork as a self-employed enterprise, they're getting $700 a month as a stipend to survive. Well, that means at least the rent is paid.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's really useful.
Wow.
I'll let you.
No, that's great. That's good to hear that the government takes it seriously. Tim, did you have a comment for that?
Yeah, in regards to, like, from one day to the next, almost every circus artist or actor's contract was canceled. Festivals are closed, bars don't do music things, and the government's put into place, starting from the beginning of April, artists that are able to prove that they've lost contracts will be able to apply, and they'll get $500 a week to be able to cover things. Yeah, and it's the same thing. They're starting to recognize the extent of the cultural industry and what it represents as a volume of a part of the economy. It's massive. Donald's absolutely right.
Mm. And Shana, I know that the performing arts economy in the U.S. is huge. It's probably also a big contributor, but I think our government kind of slices it into different sections, and I don't think circus is on the radar. So do you have any faith that the circus industry will be buoyed up by any of these measures?
Well, I have a couple thoughts. Let me back up for a minute before I answer that question. I just wanted to chime in on something that Donald said, because that issue of the students feeling like this is their safe home is something we're really feeling here as well. And I know a lot of the circus schools around the U.S. are feeling the same way, that this is their safe place, this is their happy place, and they're terrified of being turned out of it and having to go somewhere else. And that's been a tough one for us to navigate. We were just here the other day. There was a beautiful sunny spring day, and all these students came out and were juggling on the grass, and we had to be, do we let that happen? Do we send them home? Like, what do we do? This is where they want to be. This is their adopted family and their community. So again, the online stuff is helping a little bit, but I do think that is a really tough call for all of us right now, as to how to keep the students' morale up. Answering the question of government support. So I feel like we're in quite a different situation here. Again, with my school being so new and with us just having our first graduation happening, our anticipation was that we were graduating students into an unsupported world, into a place where they were going to have to figure everything out for themselves regardless. And we've been trying to prepare them for that. And so I'm not so much thinking that this changes that as much as it pushes the timeline back a bit. I think that this means for our students who are graduating that they won't have really any opportunities this summer when they graduate, or even possibly into the fall, and that we're looking into next year to see when their careers might have a chance of starting. But I don't feel like we're going to have any more or less support from the government than we would have otherwise. I agree with you. The circus sector is kind of off on its own in the U.S. right now. I have seen a few initiatives going on to try to include like the entertainment industry in some of the aid packages, or independent contractors possibly. But we are certainly finding out, both from the teachers and the students' perspectives right now, how very unsupported our artist community is, and how many of them have been hand to mouth before this, and the loss of a couple weeks of pay it may not be able to be recovered from. So if anything, it's highlighting the weaknesses that exist, but I'm not anticipating major change on a governmental level.
Yeah, I can imagine that. So this is probably, Donald, you'll want to respond to this first, but I want to hear from everybody about this. We're talking about online education being a thing that's happening now for universities. what are the methods that circus schools can use to teach online? Shane, I know you're already doing that. And what are the limitations? And also, what platforms are you using to facilitate this? Donald, do you want
So our school, the Carampa, is sort of just sort of sucking off of the university tools. The university has its own online platform, and that platform does facilitate, not necessarily, there is a way of doing conference classes, but organizing a morning training is not easy for us. You know, you'd have to do it, it's easier on Zoom than through the university platform. But we do have to, the teachers are generating weekly work plans, which include physical training, and then they're posting videos of references to the different exercises that they are asking the students to do. But of course, these are not online learning tools. These are tools that people who have been with this teacher for the last 6-7 months know what they're doing, know what they're talking about, and the teacher says, now you're going through this. So it's not something that can be shared, if you know what I mean, if you haven't been in classes with that teacher, unfortunately. Or fortunately, I'm not really sure, because I think there's something almost reckless about trying to transmit circus training in e-learning format, right? So the teachers, most of it's basic training. Some of it is conceptual. So on the one hand, there's theoretical contents. Theoretical contents are the history of circus, the aesthetics of circus, critical attitudes, watching things and talking and commenting them, which is good. We also have business module, which we're thinking about doing online just to get it out of the way if we are able to get back to school. And then the practical classes, well, people are sort of narrating to their teachers their sequence, the piece that they're composing, because we're at the time of year when people are more or less beginning to work on their individual or group compositions, right? And so they're narrating and they're talking them through, and that is actually a useful tool, because it's, you know, what's going on here? And if you're training, you're not quite enunciating it. And so the fact that they're enunciating is actually very interesting, but we can't do that for the next 2 months.
Yeah.
You know, if you're not actually up there trying it out and feeling it and tweaking it, it really doesn't make much sense. So far, most of the contents have to do with either physical training, you know, really just week-to-week progressions, individualized for the different years and for the different specialties. The juggling teacher does put specific exercises online. The handstand teacher would like to, but is not sure. Obviously, the hand teacher says, we're dead.
Yeah.
Right? Hand-to-hand is just not happening until when? Right? And that's another question. Because the social distance thing means that there are all sorts of partner activities that we have to think about. Right? I'm going off on a tangent here. Thinking about that, my mind went to duo ice skating, figure skating. And in figure skating, there are lots of moments in which you have that parallel movement of the duo, and they might just be touching the tips of their fingers. And I sort of asked myself, is that interesting for our teachers to look at and think about how to develop this other language, or how to borrow from that language and perhaps reduce the actual contact in duo acrobatics, maintaining an aesthetic and maintaining particular moments of spectacular circusy things, because they're often just touching hands, and you can touch hands with gloves on. And if they're doing lifts against costumes, so it's not quite as physically intimate as hand balancing exercises. So something that sort of went through my head as, should we talk about this with our teachers and say, you know, look elsewhere and find other ways to make people work together? Okay?
I'm sure that the virus is going to cause a lot of artistic response ultimately. Like, people are going to probably be making art about this soon enough, and you know,
lots of shows about solitude next year.
Yeah. So how about you, Shana? Did you have anything to add to the online experiences? What platform are you all using at Circadium?
Sure. Yeah, so we're using Zoom right now. And one of the big things we're struggling with is the question of, are the classes required or not? So right now, nothing is required. Our students can come if they want to. And they're also like sending a lot of videos back and forth to their teachers. We use Google Classroom for most of our year anyway. But this question of requirements is a big difference between us and universities. So that's the reason the universities have kind of taken a break and they're shifting their curriculums fully online. We don't have any kind of directive like that from the vocational college division of the Board of Education. And so if everything is optional, it's just difficult. It's difficult to make sure everyone stays engaged, to hold them accountable for anything. And so our doing it is mainly to keep people active and to keep people connected, as opposed to any major learning outcomes. You know, we have a couple of handstand classes and conditioning classes online, dance. We're doing some dance classes online. But all of these are really just for everyone's benefit, more than any measurable progress that we're anticipating.
And I think about, like, you know, isolation can cause different responses to people's mental health, you know, so it's probably good to offer these kind of things, but also at the same time, you're not checking in with them every day physically to see how they're doing and if they need extra guidance. So whether or not they show up for class, it can be problematic, or it could actually be that they need the space. It's probably really difficult to know.
Yeah, and I'll say the teachers are checking in with their individual students one-on-one, but there's only so much they can do. They can say, "Are you doing your conditioning? How's it going?"
Yeah, they're not psychologists, right? Yeah,
that's as far as it can really go.
Tim, did you want to add something?
Yeah, so we have, like, the indications from our validating institution are quite clear. We're not allowed to give any online classes until the end of the 2-week period. Teachers are not supposed to contact students individually. We're not supposed to give them any homework, and we're not supposed to give them any catch-up work.
Wow.
Because again, this whole idea of equality of access, and they don't want teachers, you know, dealing with individual students on their own. So that may change, but they may shift to online things from Monday in a week. Mm-hmm. I do a newsletter to the students and teachers every day at 4:00. I have a meeting with my team every day at 2:00 to go over what's come out of the different press conferences from the provincial or federal governments. And what we're realizing is that we're putting into place the different contents of the theoretical classes that are left to do before the end of the year. Mm-hmm. So I do have the teachers preparing PowerPoints and the resources that will be in place when we can put them up online. We use a virtual learning platform called EduPage, which is kind of like Moodle and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So we'll have the resources in place when we're able to give online classes. The Circus stuff, we have no idea how we're going to manage it. But what we're starting to realize is since the students are in contact with us, some of them nearly every day, we're realizing that they're starting to understand that they were making an escape into their physical activity. Mm-hmm. And that this kind of forced homework that they're doing, I know that there's students writing music for other students. I know that, and we're going to start helping them. You know, the third-year students need to update their address list. They need to rewrite their CV. They need to, all these kind of things that they would put off till later because they always wanted to come and do their circus activity, now becomes priority. And they're starting to appreciate this brain time that they were avoiding when they do the day-to-day circus stuff. Yeah. And I'm really the communication from the students is really reassuring, because they're not, while they're disappointed and frustrated, they're not really suffering from this period, because they're realizing that there's still tons and tons of things that they can do, and other creative outputs that they can explore. So it's really interesting.
Tim, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that was going to be one of my questions, was what moments and messages of hope have you received, or acts of kindness that you've heard about, or things that people are getting out of this that, you know, in spite of the fear and all the terrible side effects, are helping them to learn new things or to adapt. And that was a really great version. Does Donald or Shana, do you have anything specific you'd like to mention?
We have people prepared for their quarantine, you know, like a day or two before, people who lived alone, who have the teachers who lived alone, who decided to get together. And they said, well, you know, just come here, and when they lock us up, at least we're not alone. You know, two of our aerial teachers have done that. One of our theater teachers, not with somebody from our organization, but with somebody else. So there is an interesting redefinition of what is being alone, what is being accompanied. Right? There's a sort of we're not in Kansas anymore feeling about this as well for me, that we have students from 14 countries, okay? So 14 countries means that there's an enormous dispersion, and not just dispersion, but also not synchronized contact moments in their natural days, right? So it isn't so easy to organize a class for somebody who's in Mexico and somebody who's in Chile and somebody who's in Madrid, right?
Yeah.
And that was sort of, there's sort of something about that dispersion moment when they closed the universities and everybody went home. It was like, let's deliver coronavirus to all the corners of Spain that haven't got it yet.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Right? It was this really, and as a result, it really has extended a lot more since the moment where the day before everything stopped and everybody started running to the far corners of their of the country, of their spaces. I'm convinced that a lot of the Latin American contagion comes from people who have fled Europe. And that's why it's just now getting started, and it is getting started.
Yeah.
But I think the students are among themselves. They're a lot more in touch than they are with us. The teachers with their university planning are letting that become available to the other students, to the Carampa students. But they're sort of doing that through the students. So like, one of the students from the university program sends it to Sam, and Sam has the WhatsApp list for the rest of the group. So they're sort of not avoiding us, but taking care of it on their own.
That's good. They're taking like ownership of their own communication. That's a good thing. Shana, how about you?
I have seen a couple of really lovely things happen this past week. So I had one student that compiled a list of every online full-length circus show he could find to send that to everyone. Full instructions of whatever's out there.
Hey, could you send that to us, Shana?
Yeah, I'll send you a great list. That was one thing that came out. Another thing that I've seen has just been the inventiveness of my teachers. So when they started doing this online stuff, again, with no pressure of having to meet any particular goal, they've been very creative with what they can come up with to put online. I had a clown teacher who did a whole session last week where he had all of the idiot characters meet in an online forum and just interact through Zoom. And that was really fun to see. I will say that as far as students being energetic about their own work and progress, I'm hoping that improves in the weeks ahead, because right now I think all of us are feeling so discouraged and having trouble just getting up and functioning in the daytime that it's then hard to think really proactively about what does my career need and what should I do in my life besides, cleaning and answering emails. There's a lot more of those things that Tim was talking about that I hope our students can get a little more energetic about. It'll be easier once we have some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, some kind of moment we can all say, okay, on this day things are opening, things are getting back to normal. We can see when there might be some shift. I think that'll be good for all of us.
Yeah, Tim?
Yeah, I think following on from the possible positive outcomes of all this is like the creativeness of the teachers, but I've also realized that it's opened up the fact if we have to cancel the end of year ensemble performance, what else can we do? And it's been easier to raise those questions with my team because there's no other possibility. You say like, we can't fall back on the fact that we've always done the end of year performance the same way for the last 10 years or 15 years. So that's the way we'll always do it. And now we have to change. And people in this situation are more than willing to change almost immediately. And I think that we're going to find new ways of working that we'll be able to carry on once there is that light at the end of the tunnel. And it raises questions even for our workforces outside of Circus. You get the impression that people had to come to work because if they weren't at work, you couldn't see that they were working, so you were justifying what you paid them. Now the work is still done and everyone's at home because we have the tools in place to do it. So maybe there's a different way that we're going to view working after we come out of all this, and question the resources we put into things. I think there's tons of stuff that we can reflect on that's going to be very positive for all of us going forward.
Yeah. I was having that conversation with my husband this morning about how, as terrifying as all this is for everyone, one of the bigger things we think of is like, what's the impact in the future for our whole world, for the way we do things in our economy? And there's something about humans that's very adaptable. I mean, I think that's why we are where we are now, is because we've adapted so well that we've kind of like mastered our environment, but it was all a big house of cards, and now we're going to have to like readjust and adapt, and this is going to be a big adaptation. But
yeah, like there's going to be new problems that will come up, like Donald was saying. Now the wild boars are coming out of the mountains, so now how are you going to deal with wild boars in your garbage cans? You know, it's like, what are we going to do?
Yeah,
but there is less pollution. The animals in nature is coming back quite quickly, and that's really surprising.
Donald, were you going to say something?
Yeah, well, first of all, talking about coming back quickly, I have doubts that our children's programs are going to recover their students as quickly as our professional programs.
Exactly.
Because they're talking about social distance, maintaining social distance for months or for a year or until there's a vaccine. And so being overly protective as parents are today, I wonder how many of them will be bringing their kids immediately back to Circus as soon as we are legally able to offer them the possibility. But the question I have for you guys is, are you sitting down and saying, well, if we get back by the end of Easter week, we can continue first and second year. If it's till the end of April, we might as well send second years home. If it's, have you started thinking about what the possibilities are of recovering the rest of this year? Can we say, well, let's not end at the end of June, let's go into July? Or can we say to the first years, we're going to start second year at the beginning of September instead of the beginning of October? Have you gotten to that reflection yet?
Good question.
We'll do that tomorrow.
Yeah, you go
first.
Tim, go first.
Okay. Well, again, we have to take a lot of our lead from the different agencies that give us the directives. But I have thought of, okay, what happens if we do start up next Monday? What happens if we start up beginning of May? And what happens if we have to cancel, just put the key under the door until the middle of August? Because the government, the Ministry of Education has told us to keep doing all the administration for the new students for next year, as if nothing's happened.
Yep.
So I have to keep a team in place. It's like, regardless of what the time span is, I have to figure out what a skeleton crew is to keep the organization functioning, because also we have so much specific knowledge in the organization. And that means, and I mean everybody from the cleaning team, the receptionists, the accountants, everyone that manages it. If we lose those people to other jobs, for example, then we can't start up right away because we have to train up a whole new staff. So there's going to be, how do you balance off paying people with no activity? So when there is activity, you have the right knowledge to be able to benefit from that activity. And, but I have the toughest thing is not knowing any time scale. So I have like 3 or 4 different time scales, and the board is asking us stuff that, you know, they're quite, you know, compassionate, but they're asking questions that I have no answer for. I only have 4 answers for.
Yeah, there's so many contingency plans and uncertainties. And have you all had auditions already this year?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're thinking about, no.
Ours would be at the end of June. We have always had the possibility of auditioning by video for people from outside of Europe. And we're probably going to generalize that as an acceptable way of auditioning in June. And then we usually do what we call the sweep up at the end of September for kids who haven't gotten into other schools and stuff. So we usually had a second audition process, which this year we had doubts about, and now we have confirmed that we will do it. And
Okay,
that hopefully will be presented.
Since you're already telling us a little bit about that, why don't you tell us about your contingency plans that you've worked on for 2 weeks, 1 month, fall, those
Okay,
options?
so our second year students usually finish at the end of May.
Mhm.
And during the month of May, we have 2 or 3 festivals that they participate in. If we don't get back until the beginning of May, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. And if we don't get back to the beginning of May, those events will probably be canceled. It doesn't make a lot of sense having them come back from all the different places where they've dispersed to, which is sad because this is our 20th graduating class. And that's sort of special, right? And, we've gotten to 20 years, and these are the ones, and we would really like to be able to celebrate that in some way, and we might be celebrating alone. The first year students, at some point, they begin the process of their creative collective creation. And if we recover them even in the middle of May, and the only thing we do from now until the end of the year is that show, but they were able to get that show together and finish, which is not just the creative process. As far as I'm concerned, there are a whole series of other competencies that we work on through that process. If we were able to start, even if it's the 15th of May, we usually open at the end of June and we do it till the 3rd week of July. If we can get that done, that would be wonderful. It would really feel like return to life.
Okay. Yeah, that would be great. I hope so, Donald. Shana, how about you? What's your contingency plan at the moment? Oh, your several contingency plans.
Right. So again, being small and being flexible, there's a lot we can do if we are able to open the school in April or in May. There are things we could even do to push coursework back into the summer or even into next fall. Those are all possibilities I'm considering right now.
Okay.
The end of year shows are probably the biggest question mark because some of that won't be in our control. Some of it will be based on the theaters and whether they decide to open their doors again or not. But those decisions will have to come out within the next few weeks so students know what they're preparing for. One of the biggest things I'm looking at is our final exam. So we did have our auditions successfully for next year, and I'm not anticipating problems going into next year. But we were not able to have our final exams for the 3rd years, and that's something that seems like a special opportunity that we should try to reschedule so they can do something like that. But those decisions are all kind of a week-by-week situation here. We also still could have the final exams the way Quebec did, which is just by video instead of live. So those are the biggest things on my mind right now. As far as the content of the course, I'm seeing a lot of possibilities for flexible scheduling around changing the way that some classes can run online, some can be pushed back later, and some we can simply forgive and just move on from going to next year.
And have your students dispersed back to home, or are most of them sheltering in place, Shana and Tim?
For us, only a handful have gone home, but of course they've gone home to the West Coast, and they've gone home to this, they've gone pretty far. And I'm still trying to pay attention to travel restrictions. I heard last night from a student that they're not allowed to travel out of their home state again for the next 30 days. So if that becomes a thing, then it would be very hard for us to bring everyone back. But I also feel like we could, again, with a little bit less government intervention, we can bring things back in a partial way. We can bring some of our students back. It doesn't have to be an across the board. We don't have as many of the equity concerns that they have in Quebec right now to make sure everyone has the same thing.
We've had about 6 students go back, some to the United States, some have returned to France. But when I look at the curve, when I look at the numbers in the United States, I look at the situation in Spain, I think we're quite low on the curve for the moment. And they're only starting to talk about stopping interprovincial travel because that's, for the moment, they're only talking about it. They haven't stopped it. And there's going to be a situation of some Canadian students who've returned to their provinces, even if they came back in, would then have to self-isolate for 2 weeks afterwards. So there's always this knock-on effect of things. A lot of provinces have just said, okay, school year's over, everyone passes. Basically, they've just blanket passed everybody in primary and secondary school, and in some universities in provinces, just to keep things moving along.
Yeah.
And that may be the case here as well. Again, the amount of things we have no idea, the amount of things we don't know is staggering.
Yes, certainly is. And I know we don't have all the answers. So is there anything that you can think of in your individual sector or not regions that you can advocate to the government for, or to other associations for support for the arts sector in general and for Circus in specific?
Well, I think that all the contracts that have been canceled by public institutions should be paid, right? Because if a company has in the next month and a half 6 shows on their calendar, and they're not going to be able to do them, it's already budgeted. If you don't pay them, they're going to have to invent all these other ways of getting money to these people who are in precarious situations. Well, at least the stuff that's already signed, just pay it. Send the invoice along and get it through Treasury and get the money into their pockets. That's real money. It's not hypothetical earnings. It's not as if all the companies who work in Circus should have that money, but people who really have that. We have a program that we do with the city government. We give classes in another city space. And the first day, the day after the announcement came, they said, this is being canceled and your teachers are not going to get paid for the classes that we're canceling. But I have them, they're salaried teachers, and I count on that money to pay their salaries, right? And they said, we'll be giving the money back to the parents. I said, well, the city is going to give you your money, right? So you're not going to suffer. You're going to give money back to the parents, so they're not going to suffer. So the only person who suffers is the teacher.
Yeah.
And so they finally rectified. So I think sort of insisting that instead of finding alternative methods, at least what is already signed, just pay it.
Yeah.
As an advocacy strategy. And it's really simple.
Mm-hmm.
It's really there.
Yeah.
You hear politicians here saying the deficit doesn't matter now. So that, in fact, if people are saying the deficit doesn't matter, then that's going to make entire sectors of the world change. And I think one of the things we need to advocate for is universal basic income.
Yeah.
So in fact, if you're saying, okay, this might happen again, who knows when, instead of having to put all these special measures in place, you build the security into it by knowing that everyone has a basic income that would then continue even if we're in this situation again.
Mm-hmm. I agree. That is an important measure. But I do like Donald's action step. You know what I mean? That's something that each person can do right in the moment and the place to advocate for their educators, for their artists, for their students.
Yeah. Well, we have here in Quebec, there's the association called En Piste, which regroups everybody. And that's what, on the board of that's what we're doing, putting the strategy in place to advocate for the schools, for all the different levels of the sector. And so we have meetings with the Ministry of Culture in regards to that. So
that's great.
For us, the education sector is last on the list. I think we're 7th on a list of 5. The venues, the companies, the individual artists, they all have much more importance than the teaching sector. And actually, many of them are even saying, well, who cares if the schools close, because we're going to need the work. So why are we generating more professionals? But we're sort of having to deal with that because, the number of schools is always smaller than the number of companies and professionals. So you really have to, be diplomatic about defending the need for the continuity of circus education.
Yeah.
Arts education.
I think it's also a time to not foster division in our sector like that, where us against them. I think it's a good time for people to kind of if we could all band together on all different levels of the industry, we could probably get more done with funding and support from other sources than if we say, well, this doesn't need to exist, but this does, because everyone is needed. Every level of circus is required, in order to keep it as an art form.
Right. When you talk about performing arts, there are big businesses involved.
Yeah.
There are the big producers who their only interest is getting the Lion King open up again, and they could care less about everybody else.
Yeah.
So we have to deal with that because they sit down at the same table.
Yeah. Do you have any? Oh, go ahead, Shana. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to say that we started off, especially on the recreational side of the school, to tell our community that we are continuing to pay our teachers, we are continuing to pay rent in the building, so please continue to support our school. Please don't pull your kids out. Please don't demand refunds, take credits for future classes, things like that. And what I'm finding to be a reality here is that it's not just our school that is suddenly having a cash flow problem. I mean, so many of our parents are, working, in the gig economy and don't have steady income and have suddenly lost their income. And if they can't put food on their table, they're going to need to pull their kids out of circus classes. So it's a ripple effect that we just have to respect, I think, and not try to make people feel guilty for the choices they have to make right now. But I'm also telling my staff that we're going to look out for you as best we can right now. We're going to do everything we can to keep your paychecks coming. At the end of the day, our school needs to survive this. You all want, when this is over, for a school to come back to, whether it's 3 months from now or 6 months from now or a year from now. Everyone wants the circus school to live and thrive, and for us to be able to keep making the art that we're making and providing the education that we provide. So that's going to be some short-term pain for everybody. But in the end of the day, we're going to make the best choices we can make to keep this institution alive.
I think of what's happening right now. They decided to suspend evictions for renters as well as for lapsed mortgages, which is kind of like a win-win, although not a perfect situation. So if someone can't pay their rent, and then the person who owns that mortgage is going to lose that property because they can't pay the rent, the mortgage is also suspended. So if they can't pay, they're both on hold. It would be nice if there was a solution like that for the circus schools, okay, if the students can't pay for recreational classes, the building itself is not going to be in jeopardy because the mortgage or the rent on the building is on hold, or, things like that could balance the measures. Tim?
We've been contacted by our bank already that said that any loan that we have with them, we can apply for interest-only payments for the next 6 months, which means that since that we have to pay back, our concern is exactly like Shana. We need to make sure that the entity of the school is here for when everything starts up. So how do we take care of our people? How do we take care of all that so we can start up? But then, there are starting to be measures like that people aren't asking us to pay back the loans and things like that for months and months and months. So we'll be able to lower those kind of costs to make things more palatable for the future.
Yeah. Well,
we sort of live in a state of grace because we don't owe anybody money, and we are owed more than we have pending to shell out for salaries. So we have money in the bank and we have no debts, and we're better off than 90% of the world. And we don't pay rent.
There's something to be said for big top life after all, isn't there?
Yeah.
Cheaper than a brick and mortar setting. Yeah. So I guess, we're kind of running out of time. I just want to ask each of you if you have a call to action for your students, your educators, and if you have any advice in the meantime before we sign off.
I do. I have some thoughts.
Okay.
I think this is going to be a hard time for everybody. It's already a hard time for everybody. We're going to struggle in together. And one of the things that's highlighting for me is that the physicality of circus and the very human connection of it is what we're missing the most, and what is going to get us out of this afterwards. That when we do get back to a place where we can begin to function normally, I think our art form is actually going to have a rejuvenated mission to help people reconnect and help people experience the world in a physical way. And so I guess I'm sending the message out to all of my staff and students that to hang in there and do what we can to support each other, but also not to lose sight of the art form that we fell in love with in the first place and what it can mean for us going forwards.
That's very nice, Shana. Thank you. Tim or Donald?
Yeah, I would say to our sector, reconnect with the new creativity that this situation is going to provide us. We're adapting quite quickly, and I'm so proud of our sector for how quickly it is adapted to the new situation to support each other, even though we haven't found the solutions. What's going to happen afterwards? We found solutions to support each other, and it's spurred on a new wave of creativity in our sector that people, circus people are embracing technology when it seemed like one of the hardest things for them. My teachers are answering emails, which they never did before. I love it.
Yeah.
Embrace the new, and we'll get back to what it was before a little bit, but we'll have brand new ways of dealing with our daily life and how circus will go forward. So embrace the creativity that this situation is provoking in you, and that's going to be part of our new future.
That's great. Thank you, Tim. How about you, Donald?
I have three phrases that jump around my head. One is I would sign off to my teachers in the notes I've been sending to rest up. And so one of them sent me a note saying, please, no, I'm rested. Give me something to do. Right, so just the concept of resting up is, no, I don't have to descansar. I have to descansar. They're hungry for activity. They're hungry for stimulus. But the two phrases that pop around in my mind, one is picking up the pieces with the concept that as we reassemble the puzzle, the image is going to have nothing to do with the puzzle that fell apart.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so we're going to be building something we have no idea what it's going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
And the other phrase is deep cleaning. And I think deep cleaning has to do with our spaces. Before we can go back into our spaces, obvious that we have to implement disinfection protocols on a level that we've never done before. But that deep cleaning, I think, has to do with the vision of the school, with the baggage that the teachers have been carrying around for years with their relationships and all that sort of thing. All that has to go because we have no idea really what this new horizon is going to look like. So
That's very true. Very true. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. I just want to
say one more thing. There's like a little controversial thing, or maybe it's sort of for when we sign off, but maybe we should do it when we sign on. The idea of feeding our students all this online performance input, sort of, I have doubts about it, right? And it sort of rattles me. I like the idea that at the beginning of the year to our first year students, we give them a course on circus aesthetics. We fill their head with images, and for those images sort of to stay as chimeras in their brains, but not exactly as physical images that they're seeing every day. I think the YouTube learning is a bad idea. And the idea that they're seeing shows with a higher technical level or with a developed dramaturgy or with whatever, sometimes is a break, is a wall against their own creativity or their own freedom. And I think it's not a good idea. It can't be avoided if they're all sitting at home. But it's not a good idea for them to be seeing lots and lots and lots of stuff. They have to sort of be thinking about lots and lots of stuff and flashing, closing their eyes and flashing lots of stuff. But perhaps so much video input isn't always healthy.
Yeah, that's true on multiple levels. It's kind of like a godsend, and also it can be a curse if you overindulge. It can give you license to sort of live vicariously through someone rather than doing yourself. And circus people are doers, but at the moment, I mean, I think it's probably necessary just to get through each day for a little bit. But I see what you're saying about the safety aspects. That's another topic. And on that note, I'd like to invite you all back and maybe in a month to discuss what changes have occurred in the meantime, what your new responses are, and hopefully we can have a discussion then. But right now I'd like to say we're out of time, and I just want to thank you so much for coming on and telling us about your school and your region and your concerns and hopes. And I just want to tell all of our listeners that at CircusTalk we have created a COVID-19 resource page that you can go to. And on that page, we have an extensive resource list, including Shana, your students' all the online circus shows list. And we also have cancellations list there, and any time that you post on social media about circus and COVID-19 related issues, we would like to ask you to use the hashtag COVID-19 circus response, and it will show up on our feeds and everywhere. And thank you again, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the effort to get these forums, available, these discussions available to the community.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And keep us posted, okay, everyone? Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye now.
Yeah.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.